Hello, folks. I know it's been a minute. I have been too busy between work, Captain Team America, Commissioner. I'm trying to paint up some projects of mine so I can actually participate in some GTs this year with different armies that I usually play. It's just been a crazy last few weeks for me, and I apologize for the lack of update or content. But I still striving to try to become a better public speaker. So it's time to talk today about Gloomspite Gitz. I got asked. I made a poll about a week ago regarding which format folks wanted to see this bulk breakdown and effectively not really bulk breakdown, but like how do you play against Gloomspite Gitz? And we're gonna talk mostly about trolls and squigs because we haven't really seen Spiderfang yet as a an ascendant army in Gloomspite Gitz, but I'll try to give my take on how you basically approach those games against both those armies. And for the most part, this is pre-recorded. I got a few questions regarding the how to address the army, and I want to let's just get right into it. So, for the most part, one of the big things that should be no surprise to everybody is Gloomspite Gitz are very powerful. In fact, if you've probably seen them being played around a lot, even some top players are effectively considering like playing the army, and some even say it's almost borderline, not say brain dead, but like or smooth brain. But it's a very easy army to get into and start playing, and you don't really have to play the necessarily very well to win with it. But I will be honest, it is actually kind of a hard. It has a very hard ceiling to basically be to win with consistently in some of the higher top tables. And we'll talk about why. And this is this goes into the conversation into how do you play against Gitz. Just go. I think I've already kind of covered like at some other video, kind of like the high level reasons why Gitz are. If you ignore the power level of what Squigs do and trolls are, and just look at how they score points, it's one of the easiest army to score points with. Their battle tactics, and let's see if I can bring them up, are very, very, very easy. Let's see, where are they? All right, there we go. We think we talked about them before, and their grand strats are also fairly easy as well. In terms of grand strat, you'll probably see chasing the moon the most. It's effectively just having your general hold even light of the moon for 3 battle rounds and then surviving the end of the game. You'll see it mostly in the forms of Trogboss, Tranquil Trogboss, because they're probably the most durable hero they can put it on. And it does require him to be a little bit more passive for the first half of the game, but at that point, just like he's so cheap, with the Loon Skin command traits where you're getting like super high, like 80-point endless spell for like a 200-point model, so it makes them effectively a 120-point cost. The opportunity cost is not that high. There are really nice command traits, but it's not like they're not that high of an opportunity cost affected to it. Battle tactic once again we talked about. I mentioned like their easiness, or fundamentally they're like kill an enemy unit in the dark, meaning not in the effective battle line of the bad moon, score an objective in the light of the bad moon, and then kill take an objective of a unit that you respawn at some point through the Loon Shrine. And those 3 alone, like it doesn't even really matter what the other ones are. Not that they're bad, they just don't really matter, because you only really need 2 to 3 battle tactics in your book to be fairly easy to make your life, in terms of scoring points, super easy. Because when you consider GHB battle tactics currently, you have Cunning Maneuver, requires a JC, fairly easy. Then you have Gaining Momentum, fairly easy, because it plays very much into the mission design. Kill a unit, score more objectives, sit on more circles. And then finally, you have Desecrate. So those 3 alone, plus 2 easy battle tactics from your book, gives you a very easy path of 10 points on the secondary mission track, right? So you really only need 2 easy ones, and Gitz have 3 fundamentally easy ones. One is obviously a little bit more dice dependent, but due to the fact that it's worded in a way where they don't have to contest claim an objective, the same turn they respawn, but like effectively it's not as risky. You can just respawn, and then the next turn they're still alive, and you have an easy battle tactic to claim. You're like, or sorry, an easy objective to sit on. Great, they can get it, right? So it's a very low cost, low risk situation. You'll probably be using it in the second half of the game. There isn't anything else super high viable, but for the most part, Gitz have an easy advantage in terms of scoring points. You want Games Workshop necessarily to, when they create super high efficiency armies, and I mean by super high efficiency, like they're good combat, they're good recursion, they play every phase, they're mobile, and they just seem to work in the context of the GHB, whatever be it monster, be it GHCs, be it infantry base, they're just super efficient, and you want them to basically balance that efficiency through addressing some of the ways in which they score. You want them to be not necessarily impossible, but you want them to be slightly more difficult to score with, because you're going to need to offset the efficiency with some challenges, right? And you want the reverse happening for armies which are slightly less efficient, like Sons of Behemoth, to have easier battle tactics. The reality, as I say this, is everybody knows that's not the case. Like the Sons of Behemoth battle tactics kind of are not very good. It's not a super high efficiency army. And that's kind of the issue of that book right now. But today we're talking about Gloomspite Gitz, and fundamentally that's the value of Gitz. It's high efficient, super easy score path. So how do you play against them? Well, in terms of like stopping point scorage, it's not so much about preventing point scores as much as it's figuring out how to bleed your opponent's ability to score on the primers. The secondaries are incredibly hard to stop. You can definitely stop Chasing the Moon Grand Strat if they're using it. It's a fairly, if you can, in the later half of the game, if you're executing the initial plans we're going to go through, it's actually, you have a window of opportunity to do that in the second half of the game by killing his general to prevent that Grand Strat from being scored. But usually at that point, like, it means the Gitz player is probably already going to lose the game. But if you're, looking for differential bonus, advantages, what if your event is doing, basically extra points for having a larger differential? If you follow those steps, you'll probably get an opportunity to do that in the second half. So we'll talk about squids first, because I think trolls are a little bit more interesting. There's two types of squid archetypes. There's the hopper heavy intense build, and then there's a squig herd heavy intense build. They both have mechanically different ways of approaching their kill goals. Basically, the way I would describe it is they're both super efficient. They do fundamentally the same thing in terms of scoring, speed. I would say hopper's a little bit faster. In terms of hitting power, same thing. Mortal wound output. They both have a mortal wound mechanic. I think Squigs, hoppers do more mortal wounds on average than Squigs, but they're less wound dense, but then they can be inspiring presence. Squigs cannot. So in terms of like, in terms of what their roles are, they're just basically, do you want something that can benefit from mortal wounds in combat through both hits and wounds, or do you want just mortal wounds through the hit rolls? But then you have a superior version of rally through this. It's both are fundamentally the same list. There's just kind of a flavor whoever the opponent picks. I think in the long run, if the battle scroll comes out and addresses the Gloomspite army, you're probably going to either still see more squig herds than you're going to see hoppers. It really depends on changes, but I'd say that's like the rally mechanic, because one of the big things about hoppers is they get a 4-up rally from the allegiance mechanic effectively, which on top of the run and charge that they also get from the allegiance mechanic. This is all conditional being wholly inside the moon, but it's really not that hard to be that. You might as well just assume your opponent's always in the moon unless they choose not to be, basically. And so depending on the changes, rally and the point cost, you'll probably maybe see less hoppers, and you'll probably see a refocus towards squig herds, because the rally modifier doesn't change squig herds at all. And the point adjustment means that like you're going to still want to have more wound dense units than less. So if there's a point hike, then you're more likely to, if it's only squig herds, maybe less squig herds, but it's probably going to be hopper squiggers and an overall point hike. And even if it's not hoppers, heroes are probably going to go up. And then at that point, you're still looking for the most wound dense attack volume attack build, and that's going to be squiggers fundamentally. So if those two things happen, then squiggers will win the day in terms of army design. The reason why people have trouble against squigs, specifically squig herd builds, is the ability for that book to just reach you on turn one is almost table wide, right? If they set up correctly with the Squig box, the Squig boss has an ability during the hero phase to allow Squig herd units hold even 12 to make a normal move, and that's a d6 plus 5. So in terms of like reach, that gives them this extra reach, and they can still move during the next moving phase, and they can run and charge if they're under the light of the moon, which just requires one Skag Rock to be around, or the moon to a quarter, or so their ability to reach you turn one is fairly easy, because traditionally a squid player will just try to put the moon aggressively in a quarter where deployment is, so that way they can move the squig herd into it during their regular movement phase from their hero phase move and the normal move phase, get inside the quarter, and then basically be able to charge that same exact round. And then they're usually traveling, they can give them plus 3-inch movement with the squig boss, so they're just hoofing it. So it catches people off guard a lot to basically, when you see squig herds at the table, just you don't have to deploy on the line or even a few inches back. Like you're gonna want screens. It's really what it comes down to. The only way to really fight squig herds is having screens. And I know this sounds like some armies can't really like get screens very easily, but fundamentally that's the issue. Squig herds are a huge issue, and that's huge issue. I say this, but like it's a fundamental issue. They're all their efficiency depends on their ability to get buffs, and their buff packages come in 4 to 5 wound heroes, which are JCs except for the few unique ones, which are not. But it means that they are very dependent on that element being around the table. So any army that has an ability to pick off JCs really greatly reduces their effectiveness on the table. Because the key takeaway about dealing with squids with the Loon Shrine is try not to wipe them out early in the game, because the last thing you want is them to respawn from the Loon Shrine early in the game. You want to basically kind of bleed them. You want to make them low enough model count that their effectiveness is reduced. You want to basically force them to make huge gamble charges towards you, because that way it makes it harder for them to benefit from their buffs from their heroes. Like anything to basically stretch out the army, because fundamentally the squig herds is the only thing that does anything in the army for the most part, in terms of like settling board presence, fighting, and so forth. So you're trying to just make them come to you as much as possible, stretch out their resources as much, and then don't try to kill the squig herd entirely. Like if you have an opportunity to do it and you can kind of like, let's say it's turn 2, you're bottom to turn, you can blow them up, you have an opportunity to go first into turn 3, then like maybe that's a good situation, because they won't come back until the bottom of turn 3. But you really don't want to try to kill squig herds. You want to cripple them, you don't want to kill them. Like sure, they can come back with the squig herders and so forth, but if you can get them down to like, let's say like 6 to 7 models, even the squig herd spawning them, they'll be slightly like more manageable than they would be even with the squig herd. And they don't have the bonuses, right? Not having the mortal triggers, not having the potentially the mortal the extra move range from the squig boss. Like removing those buffs from them makes them a lot more manageable, and they're going to keep wanting to basically commit suicide with them as much as possible, because they're trying to get them back through the Loon Shrine. Fundamentally, you want to not kill them. Your opponent's going to try, especially if they're kind of a cunning Gitz player, they're going to try to get you to kill enough of them to cause a battle shock test that will result in them losing models to do mortal wounds to a hero nearby and so forth. So keep that in mind. It's a fairly long range ability. You do not want to be within basically 9 inches of where they're fighting. This is once again where screens are super important. Just preventing that, really deterring that Gitz player from having the alpha to try to do the alpha allows you a lot of breathing rooms on how to basically play the rest of the game. Because like I mentioned, once you start removing support pieces out of that army, it gets a lot harder to get any efficiency out of it. And so, this is where, once again, like, as soon as the GHB basically goes away and we transition to maybe away from Galatian champion mechanics, I think you'll see a real, shift in how Gitz will play. Now, with KO being around and maybe like some, Slanesh, maybe we'll see like more sharpshooters and temptation dice mechanics could basically really, reduce the ability of that army to put a lot of pressure in the second half of the game, where it's like, it's just, more about setting up that initial pressure point. But the longer you delay their pressure, less, and you can kind of dismantle their pieces, makes it a lot easier for you to approach the game from a scoring perspective in the second half. You are, basically playing points down. Let's just be honest with that. Most Gitz armies, when you're trying to avoid like straight engagements with them, so they get to dictate where like the fights are going to happen. Then they're going to try to force you to fight on points, which is what they should do, unless they go for the alpha. Then they might be too stretched too thin to do that. So you can kind of like punish them for overextension. But if they're a Gitz player and they recognize like they're not getting much value outside of just killing a screen and forcing almost no battle shock back upon them, they're less likely to try to basically do that, and they're more likely to sit on points, which means that your job for the first 2 turns is how to set up a situation where you can remove, the Squig boss or the unique underlords guy that basically gives him fight on death during a combat phase. Try to remove those pieces with whatever resources you can, and then you commit on corners. You don't commit in the full front. It sucks to be able to, forcing yourself to fight off the objectives because you're trying to hit a corner, but you're trying to get them, you're trying to cripple them, you're not trying to kill them, right? It's funny what it comes down to. That's how you manage them, these squig herds. It gets a lot harder with hoppers because hoppers typically, they can just pick off the models that are effectively in combat and then just rally during your potential next turn or their next turn. So it's a lot harder to do that against hoppers, and then they have a high value mortal wound damage they can do by retreating. They're more annoying. The strategy is still the same. Like you're trying to get them down to a low enough where you're forcing them to do these rally rolls to get them back, and then instead of just having them coming back straight from the Loon Shrine. And that's how you're going to manage squig herds. I don't really like. I think people were maybe hoping for like a straight up like easy game plan, but you have to assume you're going to be playing at a deficit for the first 2 turns in terms of point. Like you need to focus on just scoring your battle tactic, maybe scoring 1 to 2 objectives. Scoring more will be challenging because if you try to score more, I think you put yourself at risk for the Gitz having a much easier way to influence, basically get the max efficiency of their attack profiles. If you try to do that, it's about ping KG and then trying to remove these support elements. And I'll keep reiterating this because I want it to stick in people's head. The squigs are only scary, including hoppers, if they are able to be given the mortal wounds on 6s to hit, the mortal wounds on 6s to wound, that's for the hoppers specifically, and fight on death. You get rid of 1 or 2 of these abilities, and the damage drops off quite drastically in a lot of ways. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's still fundamentally a lot of attacks of Ren 1 that do, but like as soon as you start whittling out these mortal wound mechanics and the fight on death, they become a lot more manageable to deal with on the table. So, I'm going to take a little bit of a sippy sip here. So once again, reiterating the obvious for the nth millionth time, remove support pieces. Now, how do you do that with armies that don't have sharpshooters? A couple ways is, through, most armies will have access to some kind of AoE mortal wound trigger, or targeted mortal wound triggers. Sometimes it's hard to push through the damage through mortal wounds by magic because of Stygrog being able to unbind, but like there's a lot of armies that don't really need, they have, I wouldn't say superior wizard. It's hard to make an argument that Skyrock is not a great wizard, but they only really have that guy for the wizardry mechanic. So you're just effectively trying to push mortal wounds into like removing one Squig boss is already a fairly huge like deficit for them, especially when they're running double Squig herd. So if you remove one of them and then the other, that means Squig herd unit is not getting like the mortal wound buffer. But really, if you see the guy that gets some, I can never remember his name, the Underworld Warband that gives them fight on death, you're gonna like he's super like high priority to remove, especially if you're a melee army. Holy God, does it's because it gives them the ability to activate one Squig herd unit, and one that's fight on death they can kind of just ignore until they need to, until there's no other target to activate, because they know they're getting almost full value out of their Squig herds if they don't get to swing. I haven't talked about what's it called, sneaky snufflers, because they're actually ridiculously annoying to remove off the table, and they're also one of those things that can respawn, and it's kind of they're super like. Let's just talk about like all the buff pieces that can go in a Squig herd. We got the fight on death. We got the mortal wounds on 6s to hit. You don't get the mortal wounds on 6s to wound. That's only on hoppers, but they also get, it's also all out attack, so they get +1 hit as well for that. They can also get +1 attack and a 5-up ward. Sorry, the 5-up ward is more guaranteed than the +1 attack, but it's from sneaky snufflers. They have to be holding even 12 of sneaky snufflers. Once again, if they you can punish them for overextending, and like you almost kind of want them to overextend, so that way you can basically have an opportunity to get them back to turn and have no bonuses on that unit, right? Potentially. And then finally they have Sports Blood Fanatics, which can give them another +1 attack. So in all, like you can really cram a lot of efficiency bonuses into Squigs. The Sneaky Snufflers and the Sports Bladders are everything only like 200 points combination for the minimum investment. So 200 points to give like, 30, your 36 of 72 wound block +2 attack and a 5-up ward potentially is like, even before all the mortal wound triggers, is like super nice. And then the Sports Bladders can also block line of sight to your JCs. So you're going to realize really quickly as the Gloomspite players, I think they're now drunk with power because of how powerful their army is. But as soon as the game kind of settles for them, you're going to start seeing them taking more techie places like Sports Blood Fanatics to block line of sight, because people are going to realize how to really whittle down the armies by focusing on their buff pieces and assuming like you're going to play at a deficit for the first 2 turns. And then you're just trying to remove all the the compartment, the engine pieces, and then just let the car fall apart. Basically, that's how Gitz feels like. And that's how you dismantle it. It's definitely a higher approach playing against it. The few times I've seen it in a GT, and so far it's worked as a strategy. But like I said, all the Gitz players I've seen seem to be drunk with power, and they want to engage as quickly as possible. Versus, I don't think they quite realize that like overextension is a bad thing for them, and they need to maybe play a little bit more, defensively. So that's Squig herds and Squigs. We haven't really talked about trolls yet, so I'm going to focus like maybe 10 minutes on trolls, because I don't want this video to be too long and I'm probably repeating myself. Trolls are a different nature than how to tackle. Trolls don't need necessarily buff pieces to be good, and their buff pieces can be somewhat hard to kill. I'm surprised we don't see more trolls right now. I think it's because squids are too good. But once whatever the balance adjustment comes around for Gitz, I think you're going to see stocks rise in trolls. They're incredibly good. They're an incredibly good army to just play because they're very durable. They hit like trucks. They're one of the few, actually, a 9-man troll unit is one of the few units in the game that can just almost straight up pick up a Squig herd block with even over a 5-up ward. They just do that much damage to them. So the question is like, can the problem is, I guess, they trade off. They could basically, Squig herds can give can just pick up trolls, and trolls can pick up squid. It depends who activates first, right? So the addition, the mechanic, the things that like buff squids also buff trolls. Obviously, Squig boss doesn't, and the loon boss doesn't as well. But the Danko Trog boss does give them all that attack roll +1 attack bonus. That's huge. You can still take Spore Blood Fanatics that still give them +1 attack. And if you're feeling spicy and risky, you can take take the what's their name, the Sneaky Snufflers to give them a 5-up ward, which Rough Guts already have, so it's like redundant. But on a 5 or 6, if they're in the Light of the Moon, you will get a +1 attack on it, so you can potentially give them +3 attacks. And hitting on 2s, winning on 3s, right, 2 flat 3 damage. That's just like, hello sunshine. They bat everything out of the park there. But you're more likely to see the dank holds in a mixture, because if they're going to take those support bonuses, the dank holds benefit a lot more from the Sneaky Snuffler, because it grants them a 5-up ward and potentially 1 extra attack, and they have a very good attack profile. So you're going to see, I would imagine you're going to see a mixture of troll armies. Skagrok is still going to be in the army. Like, there literally is no reason not to run Skagrok. He's just too good, and it gives you another way to get fully another Night of the Moon for trolls is important, because it gives them +1 save, and mechanically speaking, they always get to heal at the start of any hero phase. So it's really shockingly annoying to try to finish off a troll because they always get to heal before you get to do anything, most likely, if there's a turn handoff. So it is, I've had many games where I'm like, I've literally had like JC's activated in the hero phase to try to kill like the troll left with like 2 wounds. It's not doing it because like, and then healed back up to full. Yeah, cool. Way to go, heroic activation. So ICP and then for the most part, the trolls benefit great from their ability to hit hard and be durable, but they are only 1 model for the most part objectives, unless they're dank holds, and then there are only 2 models. So it's not like they're as board pressure intensive as Gitz, but they make up for their fact that they just basically are just even more threatening in combat. They're more, and they're less alpha-y. They can't really alpha trolls as much. So trolls play, it's hard. The same strategy of overextension doesn't really work against trolls, because by nature they can't really do the overextension. So they're going to force all the fights on the objectives. And so mechanically speaking, they're much more annoying to deal with, because their buff pieces are not necessarily easily removable by range attacks or very small investment in mortal wounds. You actually have to fight them off the points, and that's where it comes down to can you do enough? Can you chew through their? They're basically walking around with a 3-up save, the Light of the Moon, and their 5-up ward. So it's like they're pretty chunky. They get really chunky, and whatever. Even when there's like a few left, like they can punch back very, very hard. While they don't get the 4-up rally that their clan gets, they can still rally them on 6-up, and every 6-up or rally on those things is pretty significantly useful. And then on top of that, they get to come back from the Loon Shrine. And then I haven't really talked about sub-faction for both Squigs and Trolls, but at this point, until they changed the King Gitz to only be for Moon Clan keyword units, which would really spike the hoppers in terms of power. King's Gitz is just way too good. It's too. It doesn't matter what sub-faction. It's like, what if you're playing Trolls or Squids, you're better off playing King's Gitz. Having a 4-up rerollable recursion to bring back half the unit, is incredibly useful, and it makes that battle tactic that we talked about, more consistent, more effectable, and it allows the Gitz player, to be more aggressive. They're sacrificing their units because they're more likely than not, only 75% of the time, getting that unit back. So it's versus every other, like all the other sub-faction benefits they're nice, but they're just never going to be as good as having a way to just get a more consistent way of, well, let's just be honest, a 50% increase in getting a unit back after dying. That's incredibly good. So there isn't like anything to say. trolls. Like they're like I'm very curious to see how the meta develops because the GHB is only going to last until basically July, and I'm curious to see if they're going to keep their champion rule alive. Because it really, like right now, like that's the reason why Squigs are so annoying for the armies, is because we were playing mostly a melee based game with some elements of shooting, and those buff pieces were completely immune to the buff, the shooting aspect of most of those armies. They could just freely buff and have no cost of their investment to it unless they overextend. And if you're a Gitz player watching this, probably learn to not overextend is like the key takeaway from that video. But yeah, it's once the Galatian champion mechanic goes away, I'm curious to see how that army is going to perform on the table. I'm curious to see how it's going to perform once KO kind of like makes its way, claws its way back into the meta more, because it's one of the few army where sharpshooter is like not a huge investment. Like like you don't, unless you're playing Barak Zelfin, it's impossible. It's very hard to get into a one drop situation. So you might as well just have sharpshooter. So we'll see. I hope these pieces of advice were not too nebulous and enough to be actionable. And I could I don't really want to go into, like I said, the point of the channel is to avoid trying to focus too deeply into faction specific. So even doing these for me is a little bit like it's not against the creed of the channel, but like I don't want to go into like how does Soulblight beat Gloomspite Gitz, how does Stormcast beat. There's no point. The truth of the matter is fundamentally approaching those matchups. It's about the same thing: removing their efficiency as much as possible and preventing them from scoring in the second half, or making it harder for them to score in the second half. And don't get greedy and bloodthirsty. Try not to wipe out. If you're going to wipe out Gitz units like Squigs, if you're going to wipe out both of them at the same time, great. But if you're going to piecemeal your wiping out of them, it's probably not valuable for you to do that. So I know some armies are going to still struggle until the battle scroll comes out and adjusts them down a little bit. And I'm sorry that, you'll just have to put up with it. But there's still some armies out there who have a very good chance against. Like, let's, won't talk. Like I said, I'm trying not to talk about factions, but I think OBR, it's not an OBR, Ogre Maw Tribes with the Beast Claw Raiders is still a fairly good army against Gitz in many ways, just because they have a lot of like wound range tools that like don't require to bypass the JC mechanics. So like things like that are very good. If your meta is a lot of squids, like you want to look for ways to basically do splash mortal wound AoEs to buff pieces as much as possible. You're trying to remove as much of their efficiency, generating force multipliers early in the game, so you can focus on dismantling the units down in the second half. So I thank you all for watching. Next week will be a video on deployments, and specifically how to approach deployments on each mission of the GHB. I did, my first video was talking about like why the game is going to revolve around more fighting in the center and brawl type armies. But this time I'll focus more on talking like why you want to set up in these positions. Why does it matter if you want to fight for these objectives and the flow of the game and so forth. So we'll talk about that next week. I really hope you guys enjoyed the episode, and I'll see you around next time.